Hello, everybody. This is Tom Gross of Teachers in the Dungeon. You're listening to the Rebel Base Card Podcast. Great pull, kid.
Tack rented sword away aboard the Onyx Cinder, and never was he seen again. What's the last line?
For at Atten he did plunder.
For at Atten he did plunder.
You've seen the show, and like us, you have questions.
Ooh, that was a good one, but try this one on for size.
No question should be left off your list.
Whoa, I got a crazy theory, but hear me out.
But you better have some spares.
Oh, that was one of mine. All right, let's do this instead.
With me, as always, is my friend and Card Squadron winger.
This is Greg Cass, a.k.a. Ion Cannon.
We've recorded at home and across the U.S.
Last summer, we were from the Boston Common. This week, we're in Chicago.
This is day 3 of celebration.
The show has had many names, but the purpose is the same. Let's share some time at the table.
Ding ding, it's time for breakfast.
Welcome to the Breakfast Pack, a Rebel Base Card micro podcast series. A returning Rebel Base Card podcast series that asks more questions than it answers. Today on Breakfast Pack number 95, Our Flag Means Breakfast, we're talking about the Skeleton Crew's 6th installment that debuted on Disney Plus on New Year's Eve. With me, hopefully, for another year again, as this is the first Rebel Base Card podcast of the year, is my co-host and Card Squadron wingman, Gregory Cass from IonCanon.com, who's very happy I made it through that line after about the 6th time. Greg, Happy New Year, and welcome back to the program.
Happy New Year, and ding ding, it's breakfast time. I've been trying hard to hit my catchphrase, and then I listened to this fine podcast last week and realized it's in the pre-roll, so I don't have to work so hard. I've already said it in the ears of our listeners, but proud to be a Card Squadron winger, as the case may be. So thanks for having me back on. Thank you in passing to Frank and Aaron, who more than filled my shoes last week when I got stuck in some beautiful holiday traffic.
Oh my goodness. And boy, did it go off the rails. We had a great time. I think once the cover came off of like Crazy Theories, it went really nutty. But I just want to say it was really fun to get the two of them together for the first time, and also just kind of go. And yeah, it's going to happen, especially when you're doing podcast over the holiday break. But anyway, but I appreciate it. We made it through the holidays, so we're already into 2025. But yes, joining us for this breakfast is returning guest and friend of the show, Tom Gross from Teachers in the Dungeon and Coffee with Kenobi. Tom, excited for next week, but I'm pacing myself. But I just wanted to say hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to the program.
Oh, Happy New Year to you and to you, Gregory Cass. It's great to be on the show with both of you. And you mentioned last week's episode 5 show with Frank and Aaron. I would agree. I would concur that it was a whale of a show for sure.
Yes, if Coffee with Kenobi is like the no speculation, no like crazy theory show, this was definitely the antimatter. This is something like the two can't meet, because otherwise it would have just blown up. But anyway, no, it was fun, and this show has been so much fun to talk about, and it's great to have you on aboard. However, if you out there are joining us for the first time, this is an insert series podcast in the regular feed where Greg, Tom, and I are going to trade questions to each other that we've not talked about before about this latest episode of The Skeleton Crew. And since we're talking about a brand new Star Wars series, I'm going to remind anyone that there will be spoilers, and we invite you to please come back after you've watched to listen, just in case. We don't want to spoil anything for you because it's getting really good. And this time I'm going to remember, I liked what Greg did a couple of shows ago, but I am kind of curious. Now, you have been on Coffee with Kenobi with Father Jimmy. I am curious, though, for this program, what's your pulse on the series so far?
This series has just been a breath of fresh air. I had some anticipation about this series coming in, mainly because this is quite well documented on CWK Pour Over, and we talked a little bit about it at the beginning of the Skeleton Crew series, that I don't know how to say this. Dan Zers said it very eloquently, and it was very well stated, and I'll do my best to replicate it. But generally, I have this I don't know, I don't care for children actors. I feel like a lot of times children actors really struggle to play the role that they have been asked to play. Many times they're asked to be children, but with adult roles in terms of like maturity and things like that. And that has been what has been so wonderful about Skeleton Crew is that these kids are just asked to be kids. And while they're marvelous actors, their acting of being children have just been phenomenal. I've bought into it from day one, first several minutes of this episode or from this series where Wim and Neil are lightsaber playing while waiting for the school bus. We're doing that myself. And so I could feel that and I could appreciate that. And everything about the way the kids have been portrayed has just been honest and true that I've absolutely loved it. And then the story on top of it all, I've really enjoyed sinking my teeth into the lore that they are feeding us. And every week I come back for both the story to find out what's going to happen with the children, and for the lore with Jod and just the idea of Etten and this groupings of planets that have been kept secret for so long.
It's been really fun, and I think not only is it nice that it's exceeded our expectation, but I would also say, and I'm going to take a cue from Thank the Maker, who I was kind of listening to, is that kind of the vibe that I'm getting from a lot of the other podcasts and stuff that we listen to, that it's kind of the mutual, that everybody's kind of pleasantly surprised it's being received so well. And I thought they put out some things that I think, Greg, we might have to tackle on a post finale show is, in coming up with Andor and how much season 2 is going to cost. It's going to end up being much more than Acolyte versus a show like this versus of like what Disney Plus's expectations or what are our expectations or what's going to get made. And what do we perceive as a success? Because it's hard, it's not something that you go and watch in a theater and then talk about on the long take. This is something where they either have to talk about, did they get any growth? Did they get any churn? I think it's some great fodder for future episodes. But is that kind of vibe you're getting as well?
Yeah, I mean, there was this little press blip. I think Tony Gilroy gave a couple of comments about how he's been given a longer leash in terms of finances and creativity for Andor season 2 due to the success of season 1. And I mean, well earned, right? I absolutely let him do whatever he wants with it is what I would say to Bob Iger were I to be asked. Still not, my phone's not ringing on that one. But it is impressive that that Skeleton Crew has managed to, I'm going to say it's managed to do Star Wars on a budget. It doesn't seem like it's breaking the bank like those other two shows are. I think Acolyte, if it had cost half as much, it was beautiful, but it was off the charts expensive. And that, I think, is a part of why we're not getting more of it, unfortunately, in this kind of conditions of streaming as they lay now. So, I mean, if we're being completely honest, I felt the volume a little bit more this episode than I have previous episodes. There were times where you're like, oh, I see you're sitting on a piece of ground and there's a rock like right at the edge of where the screen probably takes over. But, those moments have been few and far between on this show. And I also think we let those affect us too much, right? Kenobi gets a very bad rap for its use of the volume, but it's like if they never showed us the magic trick of the volume, we wouldn't detect it. So that is all to say. I think the show is doing a great job at delivering week to week. I think Tom said it exactly right, which is I came like, okay, we'll see what's up with these kids, and I find myself really asking questions about At Atten and where this all came from and how that's all put together. And while that's really fun, I also am not in a place where I'm like, and it has to connect and it has to be the secret nephew Darth Vader had when we didn't know about. It just can be its own thing, and we can just have a good time and hang out with these phenomenal kids. And I'm going to ask for a kid heat check towards the end because I think there's some different rising and falling stocks among these kids.
Oh, I can't wait. That sounds like some excellent fodder for breakfast. So tell you what, before we just get started, I know we normally like to talk about the Greg's List. These are a selection of podcasts and other assorted media we ingested. I am curious, Tom, busy that you are, and are there anything else? Are there anything else that you'd like to highlight, or you've been kind of enjoying during the season of Skeleton Crew that that maybe doesn't make the regular rotation, or something that you'd like to bring to attention? Do a call out, shout out, that kind of thing.
That's a good question. I think probably, and I don't know how unique this is, but I don't know that I have said it even on Coffee with Kenobi, and that is, I am just absolutely amazed at, and I shouldn't be, but I'm amazed at how I've completely bought into the acting job that Jude Law is doing with Jod. I I suspected that the things would go the way they would, but he played it so well, so early that, well, okay, he keeps coming back to help the kids. He keeps doing the right thing, even though maybe a little begrudgingly, but he's always there for them when he needs them, or when they need him. And so I guess that's probably the one thing that I have yet to have said about this show, and that is that character has been so believable and just so intriguing to me to know where to this point where it actually was all going. And I don't know, there's still a part of me that feels like we have not seen the full play of Jod as in moving forward. In fact, one of my questions leads to that, but maybe I shouldn't have played my hand yet because I know you guys like to steal questions. So recant that. Recant that. I'm not going to ask a single question about Jod throughout this entire episode. And the other thing I was just going to mention to your point about the filming of it, I guess I hadn't really thought much about it and hadn't really sought out information about the budgets of this show or anything like that. And I wouldn't have thought that this was any different budget than the Acolyte. I feel like the whatever we want to call them, special effects is what we used to call them back in the day. I think they're magnificent. The space battles, the X-wing flights, the SM-33, all of it that you would consider quote special effects. I think to me, they've been seamless. And maybe it is because we've become so accustomed to like how fantastic this is that I don't even look for funny things. I don't even look for lines or a CGI moment or anything like that, because I really nothing is portraying itself as pulling me out of the seat or out of the scene or breaking the suture that I have with the screen and the story. And so I think it's been a marvelously produced show on all levels.
Well said. Well said.
I want to piggyback on that one, especially the effects of Neil. I never look at Neil and think that's not a little blue elephant person. Like, it's always flawlessly done, and I think the ticket with that is it is a mix of practical masks on set and prosthetics, and then a little bit of CG embellishment. My first film of 2025 was Force Awakens, because it's 10 years old somehow already. So my son and I spun that up, and Unkar Plot is very similar, right? They find that right balance of a mask with just the little embellishments that make it look like a real creature. And so it was great to kind of think like, they've still stuck by those practical effects, as well as not being afraid to use that. I'm gonna follow Tom's cue and give a shout out. I want to give a shout out to Bryce Dallas Howard, who's back
Yes.
this episode as director. And there have been some major heavy hitter film directors, including the gentleman, the Daniels, who just won Best Director 2 years ago at the Oscars, and her episode stands right up beside them. She is making top tier Star Wars, and I think it's wonderful to see on the internet how so many fans look forward to her episodes now. And I'm gonna get the internet lingo wrong, but they always say like she's cooking, right? She cooks when it's her turn, and especially the sequence at the end, I thought was really nicely cut together and some interesting choices, so it wasn't just kind of plain, and really worked for me. So that's my shout out this episode. But if we're talking podcast shout outs, let's not lose the fact, did you catch that the Colby cast has a special fourth guest for their big year end? Greg, did you see who that special guest is?
What? No,
Yeah,
I missed it.
Oh my goodness, wait till you see. Also, you could look at your Zoom screen and see him, because it's Tom Gross
No
doing
way.
the full end of year. Is it a 3-parter, I believe? So I want to give a shout out to that if you haven't had enough of your 2024 culture. And I do mean culture because it's movies, it's music, it's sports, it's everything in between. So great fun listening to that show.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that shout out. Yeah, it's become our tradition. This is my third year doing this, but the first time with the boys, which added such a new, such a new mix to it, and it was wonderful talking to them about they are music connoisseurs and of a different generation than I am. So I learned a lot from being on with them, and just to hear their take on things. Sometimes I hear the same. No, no, don't take any offense here, but I hear the same old people talking about the same old things, and it was nice to be with the new generation. I'm not referring to you, gentlemen. I'm just talking about myself and Teachers in the Dungeon with my friend Dan Ream. We're always talking about the same old stuff, and so it's nice to hear. It's nice to hear their take on things, and so thank you so much for that. It was great. I think part 2 came out here just recently, and part 3 comes out the first week of the first full week of January. So
That's right.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had 192 in my queue. That's was it. Luke quizzes Colby, and we do a Christmas movie draft. And then there was 193 is a look back at 2024 with Tom Gross, and he's already done 190. Colby is just amazingly busy. I don't know how he pumps that stuff out so fast. I did get hung up on the long take year in review, where basically Greg and Jen went at it at the Muppet Christmas Carol and all its iterations, and that was amazing, to the point where after a while I'm like, I forgot Antonio was in this, because they're just like going, they're just like, it's just like this knockdown drag out fight. PT's in there, they're all doing this, and what I actually love about that is the fact that you've got so many different movie buffs that, especially when they're kind of given, like when they're talking about, hey, let's talk about the holiday movies that we'd like to recommend. And I'm kind of going through like, okay, here it comes, but a lot of surprises in that. And that's what's kind of nice, is that there's so much knowledge in that you kind of go, oh, okay. And then, even Jen's in there going, shoot, I need to watch this, and this. And then, I'm sitting there like, I forget who hadn't watched It's a Wonderful Life, but I'm like, that's when I'm like doing the coffee spit, like, but then again, for Christmas, I got both Goonies and E.T. on Blu-ray from a friend of mine. So
Hey,
wow,
I'm gonna go listener. It must be that knew you hadn't seen ET yet. Was it Anthony? Because Anthony was pretty upset at you.
Oh my gosh,
you hadn't seen E.T.?
No, as an 11-year-old, I made a conscious decision that I just was not interested in. And if you think of like whim, like not being interested in school and wanting to have that adventure, that's kind of where I was, because after you had Star Wars and Superman and Star Trek, Star Wars, Empire, I was not interested. And there's something else, and this is something I was kind of thinking about. We're all sort of like, we all kind of feel we're about the same age. Tom and I are the same age. But you move like 2 or 3 years, like Dan and Colby and Ross are all about the same age. They're younger than us. So when you get into high school, everything hits a little differently. So by the time that we get to like Goonies in 86, that's the last thing I'm watching, because I'm like, I'm ready for like, I'm trying to figure out, can I get into like the rated R movies, or can I get into this? And so even like if you polled us as far as music, like even a friend of mine who's a couple years older, it's like where those bands hit and where those movies hit, especially what age you are, really make a difference. Just sort of like, people who come in with the Star Wars, people come in Empire. A lot of people I know come in at Return of the Jedi. And so it's like, that's there. And you're like, eh. So I think it's just one of those where it just wasn't really that interested to me. Close Encounters is another one. And I think it was like on iTunes for like $4.99. I think I'm going to add that to the collection because I've been adding movies over the holidays just to kind of go, you know what? I like it. And then like, I think even stuff like The Devil Wears Prada was like $4.99, but it had a full audio commentary, and I'm like, that's what I love going back to. Those are the great Saturday afternoons. You get the audio commentary going, and you're just doing something else, and so you can just kind of go, I want it in the background. I want to hear how they made it, because there's only so many times I can watch, the Lucas one on Disney Plus before I go, all right, I've really got to find something else to listen to. But yeah, I'll be interested to fire up Goonies first. That'll probably be the easier one. I'm gonna be like, man, it's so much like Skeleton Crew. This guys, they totally ripped off Skeleton Crew. No, wait, they came first. Anyway, that's coming up. All right.
Well, I'm just gonna say E.T. Phone Home and Greg Answer.
If it had only been able to secure M&Ms, I probably would have been. It would have been an easier sell. I was just never a big fan of Reese's Pieces. That's all.
I'm the same. I have to admit, I'm the same.
Yeah. Anyway, but I can't. Yeah, I have no excuse now not to watch them. Just like Colby has no excuse because I sent him The Road Warrior. Colby owes me a view. I sent it to him on Blu-ray.
Nice.
But Colby can get expensive because there's a lot Colby hasn't seen. I'm shout out. I'm just kidding. But anyway. All right. Tom, you know how this works. We're going to be trading questions back and forth. We haven't talked about this before. With this one, it's tough. It's a shorter episode. We're getting towards the end of the series, so questions are going to be scarce. And I'm sure there's going to be some steals on here, but that just means you got to get a little more creative. So I'm going to have you lead off with your first question.
All right. This always is very stressful for me when I do breakfast shows, because when I'm writing my questions, I'm like, okay, am I supposed to ask a question about the episode, or am I supposed to ask a question speculative questions are fair game in this, right? I mean, that's kind of the MO of it.
Yeah. You did hear last week's episode where we pretty much, it was pretty much all crazy speculation.
I was double checking because I know how those guys can be. All righty, here we go. My first question is, this is the first episode that we haven't really seen the parents' side of the story. Along the way, we've been getting, really, it's been kind of just the opening of each episode is touch base with the parents, but not here. And so here's my question. Will the parents' efforts produce any results with the Superior? I love the thinking caps that have come on. And so I guess what I can start with is, do I answer my own question? Jeez, you'd think I've never done this before.
You actually go last on this. You ask the question. Him and I will trade it. We'll say our responses, and it goes back to you for the final say. So it's like, you sound like a genius either way.
Oh, good. Yes, excellent. I love it.
I'll dive in. And so where my mind went immediately is, as it's been well established in, did you say 95 breakfast packs so far? One of the things I love in Star Wars is The Last Jedi. And I really like the Canto Bight plot. But a lot of people say, why the heck do we do that? It doesn't lead to anything, right? It's not like a successful mission, so we shouldn't spend time on it. And so since I've defended that as still being like an essential part of that movie, I feel like I can't say what my first instinct was, which is, if they're showing us it, it must go somewhere, right? So, but that is what I think, is that I actually hadn't clocked, but you're absolutely right. We didn't check in with them. There was a lot of hubbub this week because the Card Trader app revealed Neil's dad, and the internet was very excited about that. But I think that everybody's going to crash into that plot line before that plot line really resolves. So maybe they're the ones who get access to the tower, but they're not going to solve any problems. I think it's going to be that everybody just crash lands back on Aten and starts chaos, and maybe eventually gets there. But so I guess my answer there is that I don't think the parents will directly solve anything, but they will contribute to whatever the end game of the series is. A non-answer answer. Greg, answer it directly.
No. And moving, no. I'm going to piggyback off that because I think that they do help grease the wheels. You could see how bad Wendell was at subterfuge, as I said last, because he's sweating to death, basically just trying to plug in a makeshift USB stick into the computer. But I do think that the kids, it's funny because all the adventures, everything that they have acquired experience-wise up to this point, they're going to go back to, for a short time, will be their normal environment. And either, it's going to be curious of who gets to the parents first, them or the situation that completely unravels this entire society. But I do think that getting people to start thinking a little differently, there's an Apple reference, will help, because I do think, and I think we haven't seen, Neil's dad, at least a good visual of it, because he's probably a pretty big dude. And I'm like, they're going to probably need that muscle at some point, whether they're going to, whether he's going to rip off a droid's head. Let's hope that happens. But I really want to see it, because remember, this is the guy that hung the St. Pauli girl picture in the garage. This is our guy. This is he's already got the man cave happening of what you can get on AT-AT. And so I'm kind of excited to see him. I mean, Numa's already great, but yeah, I think there is a reveal happening that's going to come real soon. I think he's going to endear himself to us just like Neil. That whole family is like, where's that play set? I want Neil's house play set with all the kids with the little hologram thing. Make that Lego, and maybe it's already coming and they just haven't spoiled it yet. But there's my feeling. The parents are going to have to help, and I think they've already bought in, because they're going to have to experience yet another roadblock. And as soon as they see all this, they go, once the curtain's revealed, the wizard, there's nothing behind the green curtain, then it's all got to start crumbling down pretty soon.
So, this is uncomfortable territory for me, coming from hot off the heels of Coffee with Kenobi with Dan's there and Father Jimmy. But so I'm going to through the barrier here and bring myself into a place where I can talk about speculation. And speaking of the barrier, I think that's where the parents are going to have an impact. Is in some way they are going to drop the barrier and really expose AT-AT, and it's going to be, well, I'm going to answer one of my other questions on this, I think. Well, I'll try to leave it. I'll leave it out there. But I think we've got three groups that are potentially heading toward AT-AT very soon, because of all the story plot and where it's headed. But the only way you get to the planet is if you can drop the barrier. I don't believe that it is simply a cloaking barrier. I feel like there is a physical barrier that keeps people from getting to the planet. Now, clearly they were able to escape it, but the Rebel Alliance also escaped Hoth, while a barrier was protecting them from the bombardment from the Star Destroyer. Nonetheless, I think the parents are going to play a role in that. Time is passing. The last piece we had was Fern's mom. We've got to work with the superior. We've got to work within the system, get to the superior. She's persuaded a little bit by what's his name again? You just said he had a card.
Neil's
Wynn's
dad? Neil's mom.
Neil's mom. Okay. Yes. Anyway, they're all working together from official status to undercover cops, and I think we're going to get a drop of the barrier from the parents' side of things. So that's where I come from on that question.
Nice one. Nice one. I was recommending, a friend asked for a movie recommendation, and I sent him to Twisters, which has Katie O'Brien from The Mandalorian in it, and Wim's dad is also in it. I just didn't know him as Wim's dad when I saw Twisters. So that's a reminder that these are like he's a good actor. Like he's around, and you don't hire somebody for a small part, right? You gotta give them something to do, maybe. So that works in your favor. And Carrie Condon, who plays Fern's mom, is also a pretty decent named actor, right? Has a big career. So just to metagame a little, right? That's got to use the lingo.
Sure.
So my first question was, does Jamie Lynn Siegler really have relapsing MS? Oh, sorry. Do you not have the ad tier? Because that's the only ad I get when I watch Skeleton Crew endlessly is Jamie Lynn Siegler telling me she has. So my actual real first question is, I watched it the way I prepare for the shows. I watch it one time. I sat down with my son this time on New Year's morning. We waited till the next morning, and we watched it together. He loved it. He's a huge fan of the show, and I enjoyed it as well. And then this afternoon, I spun it up again to take notes, and I had not had this question occur to me when I watched it the first time. But after last week's episode, where's the lightsaber? We had a big dramatic ending where it flashed into his hand and he ignited a lightsaber. Donde está el lightsabero? It just seems to be gone. So does anybody have any thoughts on where they think the lightsaber went?
I do.
Yeah, I was going to say, go ahead,
Am I
Tom.
going out of turn?
No.
There's no okay. Oh, I mean, I noted that as well, Greg. That it ended. The episode 5 ends with that big. He got his face. You guys talked about it a lot last week on the show. How he has that like satisfied, like I'm gonna get somebody with this lightsaber, and then boom, it's gone. So a couple things come to mind with this, and the first one is, that packed away. He's smart enough to not pull a lightsaber out in the situation he's in. He's got it someplace where it's accessible, and it's going to come into play at some point. That's A. B is he has no idea how to use one of those things because he was never trained, and he knows how to use the Force. And you guys tackled this a lot last week. This guy knows how to use the Force, whether he was a former Padawan or a youngling, or whether he's just sort of figured the things out. I mean, clearly he's a Force user, but because there's no strings, as Fern was suggesting many episodes ago. String, really thin string. He clearly knows how to use the Force. He also knows some language of Jedi, which also to me was very revealing in episode 5. So I feel like there is some sort of training or at least awareness of the Jedi and the Jedi ways. So I'm guessing that if it's B and that he has no interest in the lightsaber whatsoever, it's still sitting down in Rened's. Is that how you say that? Let me see. It's the name of Tack Rened's. It's sitting down in Tack Rened's, and we'll never see it again, and we're just meant to forget about it. But I don't think so. We wouldn't have finished episode 5 with such a hard look at it, and it's sitting on a pedestal. And why would we waste the time with Wim igniting it upside down and watching it skid and spark across the floor for him to pick it up like that? I think it's going to come back, but he knows enough that it's not a card to play this early in the game. And this is going to come back on another question I have a little bit later, so I'll stop there.
I'm going to say C. It does clearly show that the two guys, one of the guys, the taller of the pirates that are holding him down, the one pulls out the lightsaber as he finds it in his pocket. I really was like, oh, I'm going to really hate to say this, and I was like queuing it up. I was
totally missed that.
Yeah.
if we go to about 3:45, it's he pulls it out there. It was like, oh, but Yeah.
But it clicks with Tom's theory because it's there, so he can use it. He will wait for that right moment.
Yes, I think it's definitely one of those where instead of like R2 containing it in Return of the Jedi, it's going to be like, yeah, it's going to be from the pile, because I don't think he has really shown the other pirates these abilities. You know, we went to the show went to a great length last week as we were kind of talking to allow him to like do the telekinesis like all day long, and it really gets you comfortable with the fact like, oh, he is really a Force user, and maybe was a Jedi or of some ilk, Padawan, what have you. And then his double cross at the end of the episode really throws you off. And then you have that great moment, like Tom was alluding to, we talked about, where it's like you didn't see the satisfaction on his face as it was igniting, but you could tell it was there. And I think it allowed for really awesome speculation as far as how far he got along. Was he? I'm pretty much firmly in that camp. But that does kind of lead into my question. Speaking of which, so let's just, if we want to like walk with me on this, it doesn't appear that it appears to me that he has these Force abilities, or at least was trained. Do either of you think his ability to convince, to charm folks, is that like the basic elements? Like, when other folks talk about how come he hasn't used, like the suggestion, like, you don't need to see as an identification, where they do like the Jedi mind trick per se, which I think is kind of something gets trained. But do you think his ability to kind of charm and work his way out of these situations, like we see again, are kind of like enhanced, almost as if like Anakin in the prequels and in the Phantom Menace had those Jedi like reflexes that he didn't quite know. It's like there's no way that any human can do this pod race. He just has those instincts. It's like that nascent ability. I'm thinking that Jod's ability to kind of like just talk his way out of things is this nascent ability to like what would later become a Jedi mind trick had he been trained. That is it. There's the tinfoil right over there, but I'm kind of curious what you guys thought of this.
I'll jump in first and say I hadn't occurred to me, but I like that as kind of a theory in the sense you just said. Anakin had strong reflexes without understanding where they came from. Maybe he's kind of laying it on a little thick, not realizing he's putting a little extra swerve on it. With some Force powers. My difficulty accepting that is that it was a really good speech, right? I mean, it's like a silver tongue, beautiful little bit of rhetoric. So I kind of feel like he did it on his own. And again, I'm seeing the dragons. I know who's on the show. I gotta say, I think Jude Law just rolled really high charisma when he was born, and so when you're Jude Law, things just happen, and people just believe you. So I like the theory. I respect your tinfoil, but I think he's just a smoothie when it comes down to it.
18 charisma, fair enough.
That's great. I have to agree with you, Mr. Cass. I think he's just a slick pirate, and he knows. I think he's unusually, as you say, he's unusually charismatic, and I mean, again, I think it's cool too to think that maybe he's got some of this from maybe a sense, but if it's a sense, I don't think he's aware of it. Otherwise, I think he'd really use it more to his ability, or we would see it more often. I don't think he would have sat in jail for as long as it was implied when the kids find him in jail. I don't think that would have happened there. So I just think he's a really slick pirate. He knows the code. He knows how the game is played. I mean, clearly with Pocket, he's been around the galaxy. He's dealt with bounty hunters. He's dealt with pirates. He's even apparently led a group of pirates, being Captain Silvo, and all the other aliases that he has. So I think he's just a really professional shyster. and he didn't have to work real hard to. I mean, Wim was bought in. Wim wanted to believe that he was a Jedi from day one, and Fern saw through it, man. She, I mean, just probably being a non-believer or not understanding what a Jedi is, but then also being able to kind of see through things. She's no dummy. She's been down this road. We saw her next to the principal's office. She's seen things as a teenager. Even though she comes from a wealthy family, she has street. I mean, there was the group of bikers that came by and said, "I hear you got a problem with your bike. I guess you're out." She's like, "No, we're gonna make it happen. You just." And so she has a way with people, just like Jod does. And so I think she sees through him, even though she can't explain the force wielding. He's trying to explain through thin string. But it's a cool theory. But I suspect that he's just really good at what he does.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, it's not like he probably doesn't already have a copy of Sheev Palpatine's "How to Win Galaxies and Influence Jedi." He might just be a good student and just have these natural instincts. But it is, I think it's interesting to start kind of poking the character. It'll be very interesting if we get any kind of additional details. I mean, maybe if you consider we have 2 episodes left, maybe an hour of story, and as we'll probably get into with other questions later about what can all fit in this, but will there be any more backstory? But it is just amazing. One, Jude Law's amazing. And, he has that ability to chew up scenery. And I think this monologue here, I'm like, you're getting into was it Stellan Skarsgård territory with some of that, and I just thought it was an amazing one. But just, man, the ability to over and over charm people, I go, man, is that something else to it? Because you wonder, when, even with Broom Boy, right? Or like if you go into Tales, no, wait a minute, there was where like the ability, the telekinetic Jedi ability comes pretty fast, but not everybody gets all the same skills. Some people can read a scene from touching an object, and you're just kind of wondering, like, is this how it starts? Or these are just things that are innately, Jedi abilities. But yeah, I mean, natural 18 charisma. It's Jude Law. I yield the floor on that. All right, Tom, what do you got up next?
I would suggest that. Yeah, just for a real quick, just point on that, what you were just saying with that scene. Bryce Dallas Howard, that's a magnificent piece of directing and work, and from the writers as well, because I was picking up on, I watched the captions at the bottom, as I don't know if most of us do that, or if it's just something that I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. So now I just watch everything in Disney Plus, the captions. But the background voices and how they go from one side to the other are just from yeah, he's just a shyster, oh, just kill him now, blah blah blah, to oh yeah, like I'm hungry, and all those sorts of comments that go along the way. Just, oh my gosh, it was just so magnificent, and the looks that he gives people, and when he puts his hand on the I don't know what his name is, but the guy with the patch who's kind of like the second in command, puts his hand on that guy's shoulder, and the way he kind of looks over his shoulder, I was like, this guy's not buying it. And I was 1000% right, because he's the first one to slug him in the stomach. But it was a magnificent piece of work, a magnificent soliloquy, for sure. All right. Second question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Second round. All right. So part of what I loved about this episode so much was how well portrayed the coming of age moments were for the children in this one. The growth, the learning, the realizations that they had about each other, their friendship, their ability to work as a team, all came together in this episode with that magnificent climax that might be saved for a question later. But my question is this: as they had these coming of age moments in this episode, do you believe that they have learned enough about each other and as an ability to work as a team, deal with what comes next? Or are they still going to be reliant upon someone else?
Oh, Tom, I feel like I'm gonna make a fool of myself in comparison to your usual co-host when I note that mythologically, that when characters travel from the everyday realm deep into the underworld, that's where they learn their deepest truths, and then they are able to then rise back up. And I think it's notable that this episode starts with a very long descent, a la Luke Skywalker in Empire Strikes Back, and so this is a descent, and it brought to mind for me Darth Maul in Clone Wars, right, when he's on the like trash planet. This is not quite that extreme, but this is this planet's kind of version of it. So kind of thinking of mythological structure, I would say that ideally these would be enough to get them through whatever trials lay ahead. But one of the things I want to shout out in relation to this question is, there's a very simple lesson learned here about KB acknowledging her own limitations and Fern understanding the different abilities people have. And it is like after school special 101, and yet didn't feel that way at all, right? I'm a child slightly younger than you, but we had those where everybody's going to go play basketball, and then you look awkwardly and the camera pans to the kid in the wheelchair, and we have to have a lesson about how you should have been more sensitive. And it wasn't that didactic. It was this beautiful moment where I felt immediately like KB, because whatever your abilities are, you hit that ceiling, and you have to admit to yourself that I'm not enough to get through there. I'm not enough to get to that next piece. And that exactly what you said, that's coming of age, right? Realizing you have strengths, but you also have limitations. And then Fern realizing that she needs that kind of base level empathy was a pretty beautiful one as well. So to answer the question, I would say I buy that those two learned their lessons this week. I'm not so sure the boys did, or what exactly the lessons they learned might be. So I need more convincing that the other two learned their truth in the underworld. But I think these two definitely seem ready, seem stronger, and like they're going to move forward, with great ability. Greg, what do you think?
I really loved this episode, and this was one of the, I talked about last week how it was so rewatchable, but I turned around right after I finished watching it the first time, and I watched it again because those scenes between KB and Wim were really kind of bringing me to tears. I'm not ashamed to say it, because I really bought it, and I was so happy that Tom came on here, because you kind of share some of those same fears of how they're going to pull this off. How no matter how great you write it, how do you piece it together? And also the fact that these shows are as short as they are, that are you going to have these moments? But I think the fact that, them fighting what they did and then having to go through this, and in a different sort of mix and match, you kind of figure that it's going to be, KB and Fern, and you're going to see, Wim and Neil, but the pairings of them and what they have to go through to help each other out just really paid off. I think the only knock I can say was that when KB, after she kind of rebooted, kind of sprung back up and attempted to kind of do, she was kind of flexing her fingers, and it was kind of really back fast. But I say that also, my only little gripe with Ahsoka was the fact that after Sabine got stabbed in the gut with a lightsaber and had that, had her sort of medical condition, she snapped back a little too quick for my taste. I'm like, just show me that you struggle for a second. Give me a half step of like, whoa, all right, I'm fine now. Just sort of like with Wim also, after he pours the molten metal into the form and immediately picks it up with his hands. I'm like, I'm glad the CG showed it. It looked like it cooled immediately, because I'm like, okay, I can suspend a lot of disbelief, but I know, my wife burned herself like twice, working on the New Year's, dinner. So maybe I'm a little more sensitive, going like, it doesn't take much, and you have this thing, but what I would say that when you saw him at the end, when Wim immediately was like, hey, I'm going to try to do something. And Fern's like, Neil, go do what you do. Like, then you start kind of buying it. And I knew that some of this was going to be kind of shortened for the sake of the show length, but I really kind of bought into it. And I do think that this was absolutely necessary. I was also very worried that we were going to get like, oh man, this is filler, from some of the usual suspects. And I haven't listened to anything yet, and you might hear a little bit of that, but I do think that the character moments, they came through, they pulled it off. And I do think that a lot of work went up to this, the little going back and forth, and especially, like the split up really hits home. And even like watching it for the third time, I still get choked up when you see KB and Wim going at it, because you're just like, or even when you see Fern and KB, I mean, how strong and how much, like to say that I should have told you that I couldn't do it. And, or when she talks about like, then I would have zero friends, like who amongst us nerds, all of a sudden goes, yeah, I know exactly where you are, man. I'm right there with you. So it's like right up next to my Neil poster, man. Where there's the KB one happening, because I'm like, you're my hero. That's just all there is to it. But they really pulled it off.
The inciting incident for me was when Fern says to Wim, I don't have time for this baby. What did she say? Baby arguing or baby argument or something that was, I mean, it was pretty hurtful. If you're 10 and 14 or 12 and 14, those are hurting words. And what really kind of caused that, and it separated KB, made her realize I can't say the things that I need to say. And that's kind of been brewing for a little while, I suspect, because parents previewed or foreshadowed that potential shutdown way back in episode 2. And I've been kind of waiting for her to have some sort of a mechanical breakdown, which also makes me wonder what was involved in this accident. But I don't know that that's a story that we'll get. For me, the Greg, you mentioned the coming of age of, I said Greg, that you're both Greg Cass. You had mentioned the coming of age of Fern and KB. To me, a big one is because he's the most immature of all of them is Wim. Wim has a bit of realization. I don't know that I'd call it a coming of age yet, but he certainly has a realization, and it comes at the words of KB when when he resolves her Zero issue. She stands up and she says, "Let's go," and she says something like, "Thank you, Jedi." And I think the realization that he has there, I'll tell you, that almost brought me to tears, that right there, because that's what he's dreamed of hearing, like in sincerity, not just in, playing lightsabers at the bus stop. This is real now. That like had to have sunk in heavy with him, but he makes the realization that to be a hero and to be a Jedi doesn't necessarily mean lightsabers and heroics.
Mm-hmm.
It means caring. And he cared enough to jump to attention when she was shutting down and to figure it out. And so I think that was a huge step for him, but I don't know that he's there yet. So to my question of, do I think that this is enough? And this is where my questions are kind of bad, because my answer to this relies upon a question I asked earlier. And so I think my answer to that is yes, to a point. Yes, they will overcome things that they wouldn't have been able to do at the beginning of the series, but it will still come at some assistance from, and I think poetically, from their parents. And I think the parents will have some sort of involvement, whether it's audio, whether it's just them doing something that opens the gate, opens the way for them. I feel like it's going to be something like that, but it's not something they could do. I mean, even when they're flying away at the conclusion of this, Neil is still struggling to control that ship. I mean, they are not just taking off into the sky. They are like, it's kind of like when Rey's trying to figure out how to fly the Falcon. It's not real smooth right away, and she's bumping into things. She's landing on the ground and kind of all over she drags the Falcon around on the ground. He does sort of the same thing. But again, just to repeat my answer to the question is, I think they're going to do things that they couldn't do before, but they're still going to need someone's help. And who that is yet, I think is obviously to be revealed, but I suspect it will be Kurtz.
And I'm telling you, to bring a little steam element into this, we need to bring back industrial arts. I mean, like engineering, I'm like, you need to really bring that, because I'm like, the skills. You never know when you're going to have to redo a module for your friend who has OGs. I'm telling you that, like, to how to use a torch, how to solder something. Hello, at any rate.
Oh, I just had the worst flashbacks to my high school soldering days when I was so bad at that. But it was, I agree with you. It was good to learn, and I'm glad I have that skill. So I'm struggling here. I have two that are just fully unanswerable, but it's asking us to speculate about, I think, two characters who were the standouts to me in this episode. Um, so I don't know how deep we'll go on these because there's no speculation. But since we were just talking about that wonderful moment between KB and Wim, and this comes, I actually struggled a little bit to find questions this week because this is a pretty self-contained little episode in a lot of ways. I've enjoyed this conversation opening it up more for me. So my very good friend, Director Bennick on Blue Sky, I don't know where he is these days. Somewhere out there in the world of social media, Director Bennick is out there. He was asking some really good questions about KB to me on text message, and I said I was going to steal them. So KB has these augments that I think are familiar to those of us from our Star Wars generation from Lobot. And there are suggestions now. Lobot's been very present in canon lately, which may surprise people who aren't reading the comics and so on. But there is a way in which I'll keep it vague, but Lobot struggles to like be himself and not let the augmentations or his implants kind of take over in different ways. And so I guess my kind of question is, how are you reading that relationship between KB and her augments? And kind of the sub question on that is, what was the accident, do you think? Like, what's the fanfic you wrote in your mind when she explains that she had an accident and has had these augments since then? And maybe if you want to give a percentage, what percent is KB? What percentage is artificial? I think those are all interesting.
I'll take this one, Greg, unless you're pining.
Go for
Greg's
it.
going to come on
You're
and
good?
be like,
All right.
you didn't pay attention. In the corner, it said 73%, and it said it was a, yeah.
It pained
I
me
missed
to
something.
say that, Greg. I was hurt inside.
Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
Just so you know, I did check it while we were talking, and yes, you're right, Greg. He does pull the lightsaber out, and he even like shows it and like tilts his head. He's like, "What?"
Oh,
When he
man.
pulls it out. I don't know how I missed that the first time around. And it's not, I didn't check it just to check you. I checked it because I was like, how in the world did I miss that? And I'm asking myself, how in the world did I miss that? Anyway, okay. I've thought a lot about KB and her situation. Because I really, really, I've liked her from the start. I think she's extremely capable, and some of it may be the augmentation, but I think she's very capable. She's very thoughtful, and I think she's an excellent listener. And so here are my thoughts on that. I think KB is mostly KB. I think she still has her thought processes. I don't know that she would be that different. I think Fern would treat her in kind of a different way if she was that different. Now, of course, we don't know what they were like prior. So while I'm on that topic, I will mention that I think my impression of this, because the accident has only been brought up twice. Either Fern said something about it, or KB in the presence of Fern said something about it, and then in this episode. So I'm just putting pieces together because I feel like Fern has some sort of a part in this accident. So I'm just going to suggest that it was some sort of a hover bike accident. And in some way, Fern's involved, whether as the driver, or maybe they were racing against each other, or maybe it was a race that Fern had convinced KB to participate in. And the two of them, along with those ruffian bikers that stopped by the garage, maybe it was something like that. I don't know. But I suspect in the accident, look at me. I should start writing this fiction right now so that I can submit it to Lucasfilm. I suspect that she in the accident suffered some brain damage, some sort of a mental damage that they needed to put in the technology to kind of recreate her mental capacity and her mental abilities. So when I say that, I think she's mostly her, and I think technology wise, I think it's probably a little bit more than we think it is, because her body shuts down. I mean, it's not just her brain. She doesn't just mentally freeze, she physically freezes. And granted, some of our motion and movement is the process of our brain telling our body to do it. But even when she's trying to do it, it's very slow. And so I feel like I'm gonna guess she's probably 40% mechanical and the rest, herself. And I'm gonna bet that based on Lobot's experience and based on Sibo's experience in Rebels, is that his name, the Rhodian?
Yeah.
Based on his experience, now granted, Sibo was implanted by the Empire, and so there's probably programming in there that just erased his memory. I'm going to guess that from really Lobot's point of view is there's a struggle. There's a constant struggle. I go to the comic books too. You got Cable, who is constantly fighting the techno-organic virus that saps so much of his energy. Now that's physical energy. Putting that into this context, I'm going to guess that this is very mentally draining in a consistent basis for somebody like Lobot or like KB or like some of those characters in Boba Fett that we met that are
Mods.
yes, the mods. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those are my thoughts on KB in, I think, the terms that you are asking.
Great.
I like that speeder bike accident because that kind of ties the two of them together. I had kind of thought more like a fall or something, but she apparently had suffered, quite a head injury. And judging by the gap, when she's kind of ejecting the back port or whatever, and he's sticking that thing, I'm like, that goes in pretty deep. There's a lot of empty space there. But I was kind of go with 70-30 and whatnot, but her discussion as far as her like the fact that Fern was her only friend kind of led me to start thinking of like, man, when you think about like folks who might be, I'm gonna really take this on a limb, so forgive me, like folks who might be on the spectrum a bit that are incredibly fully functional, but just have just that ever so slight problem in relationships and things like that, and to the point where you may not be able to pick it up, but it might be just something where there's just enough there, or of course they're at that age where anything you're showing any kind of difference from another kid and that you're going to get picked on mercilessly. That's just the couple of things that kind of came to mind, but it was amazing to see just how much, because the parents allude to this, the moms allude to like, she has medical needs, but you don't really quite know to what extent, but when you see her kind of sitting down, and it's different, like when she was laying on the ground after the fall, but in this case, she was kind of sitting there. And then at one point they have that side shot where she's just kind of like her head is kind of tilted over, and you're just like, man, it hits so emotionally. But she's very calm about it. She's not like upset. She's just like, just do this. This is all I've got left. And then she just kind of like nods. It hits so well. But yeah, I love the fact that they're tied together with this. But I would say, yeah, it makes sense just because of how recklessly Fern is doing the speeder, and at which now you kind of go, hello, you're tempting fate, aren't you? Because you're running around in traffic, and again, are you gonna hurt your best friend again?
I have more to add to that if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Okay. So, Greg, you just mentioned how like I'd completely forgotten that she had said that about Fern, that she's my only friend. It makes you wonder what KB was like prior to the accident to where she is now, and being at Atten being such a kind of a closed society, that when someone becomes mechanical like that, you're becoming more like the security droids, more like sort of the the very impersonal parts of their society, that I wonder if friends kind of shunned her because now she's more mechanical, or now you start to wonder, is she going to become more like the security droids, the camera that just watches you and turns, and so I don't know. That just kind of came to mind when you were talking about that.
That that's really nicely said. I didn't think of that till that moment either. Very nice. I think you've hit on everything I was speculating along these lines. The fact that Fern feels so responsible for her, and the image that comes to mind is them in that original bike with the sidecar, and it's like, um, either of them could have taken the bus to school, but Fern wanted to get KB there and have KB right at her side. And it feels more protection based now, I think, because of this. So I imagine that that's a part of the story in some regard. Um, and that's a lot of the speculation I was doing. When we do the big rewatch after, I really want to go back to that moment where the other kids were sleeping and she didn't need to, because that feels like part of this process as well, that, she doesn't have the same sleep needs. But I just want to compliment specifically the actress playing KB, because that kind of stillness to achieve seems easy but is very difficult. And I remember when Ex Machina came out, they talked forever about how Alicia Vikander had trained and used her dancing ballet skills to kind of be a robot, because you don't think about all the moves you make as a human that a robot wouldn't be programmed to make. So I think, the fact that this actress achieved all that was really well done, because I believed every second of it. I never thought that was a kid pretending that they couldn't move. I thought her servos had died. How great that it was a throwaway line that I think Neil or Wim laughed off last episode, and then no, she got corroded, and this became a huge problem. Nice little bit of writing there as well to play with that. So compliments all around to Skeleton Crew this week, I guess.
How about it when Wim was like, "It's all right, you can hang with Neil and I," and I like that was just very cool.
Sweet.
And it's just one of those like, and Tom, you and Dan, working at the high school, see this all the time, where it's like every day, where it's like the interaction between kids, and especially having kids going from like ninth grade to senior, and you probably see relationships, rise and fall. But when you see those moments where it's like they really they just go above and beyond, and they kind of act, like this is the person they'll end up being, and you're seeing those nuggets that you really can probably just relate to this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of that, and I'm seeing a lot of that in these kids. I mean, these four kids are just defying everything I believe about kid actors. So I'm amazed. I wondered when we were talking about the actress that plays KB, how she was able to physically portray the shutdown. I wondered in my mind, did she watch Anthony Daniels shut down? Because we see it about three or four different times in amongst the Star Wars movies, maybe even more, but there's three or four that I can think of just off the top of my head, where I'm like, oh, she clearly must have watched, if not that, she's watched something where like she saw the physical movement of a robot shutting down, and it's not controlled at all. It's a very like into a position, fall into a position. And even though we didn't necessarily see the fall into a position, she was holding it. They did that like hand back shot where you're looking at the side of them, and you see her like you see the curve of her back and her head down and her legs straight out. It's so good. So good.
Well, tell you what, just because we need to kind of bring things to a close here, I'm going to make the last one pretty simple, but is it? I'll preface that by saying that one of the things we thought we were going to get with a pirate type show was Hondo Anaka. And we're starting to run out of daylight in this. And I'm wondering, and this was something I was listening to, Thank the Maker talk about this before, where it was like, is there still a place for a Hondo cameo role in this? Or did we, you can lead it into the bigger response of, we haven't really gotten too many other cameos, so to speak, and the show's been incredibly strong. Does any kind of like major cameo at the end, does it ruin it, or is it just like, you know what, this has been so good, we don't need anybody else? We didn't have an X-wing pilot that we recognize. We didn't get Captain Teva. Will there be room for somebody else to show up, or is it really needed at this point?
You guys talked about this last week, and so I thought I've been thinking about this one actually. Um, to me, there's no place for Hondo in this show. And not just that's just not me talking, although it kind of is. I don't think we need Hondo, but this is logistically. I feel like in a Star Wars story, Hondo is not a pirate as these pirates are pirates. Hondo's a smuggler. He calls himself a pirate, but he's no pirate. And to be honest with you, I don't know that he'd hold a candle to these guys. These dudes are tough. These dudes are murderers. They're killers, and Hondo was not. So I don't think. And I go back to it's a big galaxy, the big galaxy, and we have not been any place. Even I mean, nothing has even been remotely mentioned except for in their schooling, they received instruction on Alderaan and Coruscant. But nothing like Lothal or other sort of outer rim type. They're all their studies were in the core, or the near the whatever the next rim is. So, and I don't mean to be to poo poo on it, because I think there's some fun possibilities, but I think he is for a different place. I'd love to see a story of Hondo in this time period for sure. But I don't think this is the one.
I just want to co-sign everything Tom just said. That sounds right to me. And honestly, I think this show has earned being standalone, right? That it has so delivered on the promise of what it was that it would kind of cheapen it to throw in a major cameo. I'm not necessarily thinking Hondo's a major cameo. No disrespect to Hondo, but he's very present in Batu, which I shouldn't ignore. That that is something that matters. I think, but. I do think that would kind of cheapen this. I go back to I did listen to one interview with Jude Law. He was on Smartless with those guys back in like October, but I just listened to it like 2 weeks ago because I'm so far behind on podcasts. And he really set up. He's like, no, this is standalone. Like we're about the time of the Mandalorian, but it doesn't really matter. And I think that's the ethos of the show. And if there is a larger connection, I think of Andor, where yes, it was Cassian, but it was kind of its own thing. But then after the credits, they showed you that those objects from Narkina 5 were getting installed on the Death Star. I'm okay with one of those. Cut to credit, end the story, cut to credits, and then be like, oh, and here's Brutus running into Din Djarin or whatever it is. Like that's the level of cameo I'll take, just to show you this is the time period, or Thrawn comes back and blows up the Pirates Bay. I don't know. Something like that would be fine with me. But I think this story, and what have we said, but how much we love these kids and love the stories they're telling with them. Let that be the story, and I'll be satisfied. I'll be more satisfied than I would be with a cameo.
Well said, well said. Yeah, I think I agree with you. And when there's talk of a second season of Skeleton Crew, where it certainly, like, it'll be very interesting, because if there was ever another one, the kids will be older. I mean, this was what they say, it was shot the same time Mando season 3, and so it's been around for a while. It would have to be a different story. It couldn't be like a Stranger Things where you can kind of go back to that same town. And so I could see it in a potential second series where they're a little older. The story has to be somewhat different. We're on board with them, like, let's get some more adventures. Then I could see, okay, if they explore the galaxy, at large, you could run into other folks, and that way it might tie in. But yeah, I agree. I think the story, everybody's kind of earned their place in this. The more interesting point is what happens to Jude Law at the end. Do we end up getting a Kylo Ren in Rise of Skywalker, where, as much as everybody kind of wanted to see him go forward, where could Ben Solo go from there? And it'll be kind of interesting to see, where does Jod or Silvo or Professor, Gorlax or whatever his name ends up being, Crimson Jack. Where does he go from here, and how does he go from here? So it'll be very interesting. Or maybe they have to go rescue him from New Republic jail. Wouldn't that be awesome? And they take his lightsaber. There we go. Everybody wins, right? We get a lightsaber. We get Jude Law again. Hop on board. At some point, someone's going to come in and shut this show down because we're just going to town. But that's how I feel. What do you think, Tom?
I mean, to kind of build on those questions, what comes to my mind where this becomes a second series and where people might look to the kids is, I mean, the very likely possibility that Atten becomes revealed to the galaxy is, in my mind, really high. I mean, one of my questions was going to be, with all we've seen the Republic show up twice with X-Wings. How are they getting this information and intel? Are they following the pirates? And is the New Republic going to discover Atten? Are they going to be the third entity, or maybe the fourth entity? You've got the parents in the Superior, you've got the kids, you've got the pirates. Does the New Republic play into this? And if they do, and if they become revealed to the galaxy, now the kids might play the role of ambassadors of some sort, or have some other type of a adventure that goes along with it to sort of validate Atten or to protect Atten. Maybe that's their new role is to play that sort of role. So who knows? I mean, there's all sorts of opportunity. Of course, it all is dependent on the next two episodes.
Got to get through those
thing
first.
Could be debunked.
But just later on, if we see a season 2 and someone goes, Misa back, then, it all comes full circle, doesn't it? At any rate. All right. I know what my Pringles can rating is, but I am curious to the rest of this panel. And Tom, we're going to start with you. Out of 10 Pringles cans, and if you want to get down to individual chips or crisps, be my guest. Every time I go to Jewel Osco, I'm like, I'm going to buy a can and I'm going to count the chips. That's going to be my homework assignment. Don't put it past me before this show is out. But anyway, Tom, out of 10 and possibly more, how would you rate this episode?
This episode? So in our house, the Pringles that are like really that everybody wants is the barbecue. You buy barbecue Pringles in our house, it may not find its way to the pantry ever. And so I give it 10 barbecue Pringle cans.
Ooh.
This is exceptional. Everything from the growth of the kids and their acting to the directing of this, all the way down to Jude Law's soliloquy to the pirates, where I thought he was going to change their minds. I'm still not convinced the dude's not going to call a pirate code and challenge Brutus, but that's for another day. I give this one a total 10. There's nothing that I doubt about this episode.
Wow.
Greg, we haven't gotten to flavors before, but I am curious about your rating and flavor of choice.
Inventorying, like, what flavor of Pringles do I like? We buy cheese a lot, but that's not really I'm probably a sour cream and onion if I had to pick one flavor.
Yeah.
But my grandfather would always have his sandwich at lunch and just like a little stack of 10, right? Like so few you would never be satisfied, but I can just picture him on his porch eating those 10 and, that's the generation, right? And he was good. That was all he needed. Yeah. So I would say that this is my highest of the season so far, but I'm reserving a little space because I want it to go higher. So I'm going to stick to 9, which I think I'd only been at the 8 range. So I jumped up a whole can. And I really agree with everything Tom said. It's the characters. It's these really lovely moments. And as we start to see these threads kind of collapse back together, it's really exciting. I want to see... gosh, we could have done 3 more hours on this. The crab was like awesome,
Yes.
and it's a Phil Tippett design they revealed today, which is great. And my daughter and I were singing Moana when it was on screen, which was great. And the ship at the end, I'm like, how cool would it have been if everybody could then go to their Lego model they bought earlier and it folded apart like that as a surprise? But I don't think that's an engineering feat that is possible. But I was hopeful. So I'm going. The sequence at the end had me gripping my couch arm. I'm going for 9, only to reserve higher space.
I agree, and that and the crab and the little trash crabs, including the one that had what looked like the 3PO leg on it, very endearing, very fast. But yeah, they were smart, intelligent, leading food right back to Mama. But I am agree. I'm going with 9 on this. I really felt that it hit a high water mark as far as like the interactions between the kids and just the job that these young actors have done. It really makes sense, and I do think that once we see, we were going to have to come to a crisis point, and they were really going to have to fish or cut bait. They have really, achieved with flying colors, and I do think that the next two are going to fly by really fast. I think this was as slow as the series was going to get, but I think they did it at the right point. I think earlier on, at Akron, it got a little dicey as far as when it kind of slowed down a bit, but I think this was a great payoff and worthy of the 9. But yeah, you're right, Greg. I'm really hoping for that 10 on this one. At 10 plus flavor, I think is going to be instead of the Spinal Tap 11, 10 plus flavor is probably going to have to be where we amend the rating from this point going forward. All right. So as we kind of bring things to a close, I did want to kind of let Tom let us know. I know where you're going to be at next weekend, but where online and other places can people find you online so they can kind of follow along and see what you are doing?
Yeah, well, as we've mentioned, I'm on co-host of Teachers in the Dungeon. It's a Dungeons and Dragons / RPG podcast where we talk about our game. We talk about the game of Dungeons and Dragons. We interview creators, authors, those sorts of folks. And so you can catch that on all the podcast feeds. We're Teachers in the Dungeon on Instagram and Facebook, and at Dungeon Teachers on Twitter. And then I have a blog, Seeking Positivity in the Galaxy, which is sort of an out there kind of blog. I don't have any particular necessary theme to that, but recently I've been, as tradition has had it for the last several years, been rating all of the digital card apps that I collect from, the top 5 cards of the 2024 season. And so by next week, the first full week of January, I'll have all 3 of those reviews of my top 5 cards of Bunt, Star Wars Card Trader, and Marvel Collect out there.
Excellent. Dr. Cass, I know you're heading back into the new school year after a great holiday break where you had to grade all the papers. I mean, all the papers. But you're also heading into a very busy time for you on that other show that we can talk about.
Yeah, people, if you are enjoying my coverage here, I cover movies over on the Long Take Review. It is Oscar season. As we record this, we are approaching the Golden Globes this weekend, which really starts the award season. And so we're doing prediction shows, we're giving out our own awards, and we're catching up. I see all the movies, but my co-hosts take an extra 3 or 4 weeks to catch up. So they haven't seen Bob Dylan yet. So hopefully we're going to get Complete Unknown in very soon. That's highest on my list. And then I'm around on social media at Ion Canon. My posts recently were similar to Tom. I was on Instagram just sharing my favorite books I read this year, sharing my favorite movies I watched this year. Kind of that year-end activity is always fun to share and celebrate what we all achieve. And even if you only read one book, that's an achievement too. It's not about the numbers. It's about, the enjoyment of it, certainly. And gosh, my plugs are going long. I also still host the Wheel of Time read along podcast. I just purchased my 6th fat Wheel of Time book. So we're headed into book 6, but Amazon just announced the 3rd season of that TV show. So if you're not interested in reading along with us, we have a set of episodes for each of the 2 seasons out already. So if you're looking for that winter binge watch, catch up on the first 2 seasons of the Wheel of Time show, and we'll be your company. That's called Through the Glass Columns. and then I'll be napping because that's what winter break is for. And I still have another week. So, Greg,
Nice.
where can people find you?
All right. Well, hey, if you have questions for the Breakfast Pack, you can find me and us on the socials at Twitter X, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, Hive, the occasional Substack, and recently been doing into the group pool interviews on Fantatrax for Skeleton Crew, and it looks like I might be able to go forward on that. I'm getting some nice positive feedback from Mark Newbold over there, who seems to like what I'm doing, and maybe allowing me to continue to work on my writing, which it's not easy. I need every trick in the book to get that out. Like I said, I've been using voice memos when I drive to kind of like put down my thoughts, and the transcribing of that and taking those and rearranging and writing around it, because you just need it's a muscle that you gotta flex every now and then, and it's really fun. So I'm hoping that more in this year, because we're gonna get a lot of Andor, and that's gonna be fun, and it would be really fun to try to tackle and be along with the pool. But anyway, I'd love this to go longer, but I got to talk to Mr. Gross about some Steam here. So for Mr. Tom Gross and Dr. Greg Cass, we're gonna let you get back to your podcast playlist already in progress, and we will see you after the next episode of Skeleton Crew.
This podcast is not affiliated in any way with Topps, Disney, or Star Wars, nor is it endorsed by Disney or Lucasfilm, and is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. All names and sounds and any other related items are properties of their respective trademarks and/or copyright holders here in the U.S. and abroad. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com.
That's it.